The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.
Hello, friends. I'm David Pasqualone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the Alan Questel story. This week, we have a man who practices kindness. He teaches, he does seminars, he wrote curriculums. He is an active global traveler, spreading the message you're about to hear, and he is just a remarkable human. He's been waiting since May of 2023 to come on the podcast because we've just been so blessed with so many great guests. And I think he has the record for me having to cancel with crazy spontaneous stuff, and he's still practicing what he preaches. So Alan, welcome to the show today. And ladies and gentlemen, meet Alan.
Thanks so much for having me, David. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's truly an honor. I'm very thankful that we got connected. I've been looking forward to this interview. And for the ladies and gentlemen all over the world listening to you right now, we're going to talk about a lot of great things. But if they listen to the episode, what do you guarantee that when they walk away from this hour, they're going to be able to apply their lives, and at least have the catalyst for a better life?
Well, I think there's two things I hope they take away. And most of it will begin in their thoughts, and hopefully it'll develop into their actions. And those two things are how to create a kinder world for themselves, towards themselves, and a kinder world towards and with others. And in addition to that, to plant the seeds of how they could come to like themselves more, which I think is something that's both essential and necessary for all of us.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because some people are like, be kinder to themselves, love themselves. We live in such a self-centered, narcissistic world. I really feel like, and you correct me, you are the expert, but I feel like today we have more extremes than any other time frame in life, where someone is either a self-absorbed narcissist and they love themselves more than everybody, or they're they hate themselves and they're a doormat to society. Is that what you're seeing in your practice? Am I way off base, or is that pretty accurate?
No, I think that exists, and the speed of our culture and the social media and everything just perpetuates that. I would say, though, that the narcissist, which is an extreme definition of someone, they don't even think about liking themselves or loving themselves. They're lost in another phenomena of who they are that's not really considerate of those around them. But I would say the majority of the people that I work with and that I meet, on some level, don't like themselves. And as a matter of fact, when I teach, I always ask the question. I start talking about liking ourselves more, and I say, is there anyone here who doesn't want to like themselves more? And what I always get is this kind of sheepish kind of smile. Like, of course I want to like myself more. And once in a while, like in Norway once, a woman responded with, I already like myself. And I said, well, that's great, but that wasn't the question. The question was, would you like to like yourself more? And she said, okay, good. And it's a funny thing. I've never heard someone reject that idea. Now, you mentioned the idea of loving ourselves more, and I think that's really important too. But what I also have found and continue to find is that idea is actually not very clear to most of us, and for many of us, it feels out of reach, too much to love myself more. Because if I don't like myself, how can I even begin to love myself? So I wanted to start with something that was more approachable, that was more possible for someone to find in their everyday life, to make it concrete, not just talk about it as an idea, but some practices that we can do so that that idea of liking ourselves more develops internally. Now, it also brings up another question, which is understanding what do we mean by liking ourselves more? And for the most part, the way that we generate that attitude or feeling in ourselves is externally. It's through acquiring things, right? Which is not bad. You have a new shirt, a new haircut, a new partner, a new apartment, a new car. All of those things can, for a period of time, help us like ourselves more. But it's dependent on something external. And what I'm interested in is helping people find a way of generating liking themselves internally. So it's not something that expires or goes away. It's something that continues to feed itself and develop more and more and more for the rest of our lives. Like I'm still learning to like myself more. You know, it's not a finished project at any point.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of people out there who are taught, oh, if you put yourself before others or if you love yourself, you're wrong. You're in sin, you're arrogant, you're
Right.
self-centered.
Yeah.
Before we get into your story, I don't want people to get distracted with those lies. Talk about the balance, because anything
Well,
extreme is wrong, but the balance is what God wants.
in many cultures, that phenomenon exists. Don't get too big. Don't think too much of yourself. You're not so great, right? But when I was in high school, I was taking a college level English course, and we had to write this paper called Who Am I? And I actually thought that was kind of interesting. And I wrote, I'm Alan Simon Questel, and I do this, and this is what I want in life, and this is how I expect to do it. And my mother read it. She went, you can't hand that in. And I went, why not? And she said, that isn't what they want. I said, what do they want? They said, they want something like, I'm just a grain of sand on the beach of life, a drop of water in the ocean. And she rewrote it with me, and I got a B on the paper. And now the ones who got A's, they actually wrote the same thing, but they just wrote a little bit better than me. And I was really puzzled by that because I think it's healthy to have a good sense of ourselves and to be able to do that, but not by always putting ourselves first. In fact, when I talk about liking ourselves more, the way I've developed it is an intrapersonal process. It's something I do for myself, with myself, by myself. And then I had been thinking for a while, how could I make this more interpersonal? And I can't remember the event, but I did something. I did some small act of kindness to someone. And after that moment, I had the feeling of, I like myself a little more for doing that. And it's not to do acts of kindness just to pat ourselves on the back to say, oh, now I like myself more. It's to be able to be genuine and authentic, to be able to do an act of kindness. But I think that's one of the things that builds our self-image. And that is not self-centered. That's something that's in direct relation to the others. And probably at the most fundamental level of both of those, it's the idea of connection with myself, and connection with those around me. And that's something that I believe even the most introverted person hungers for on some level, to be connected.
Now, you talked about, your home and high school and that paper and your mom helping you rewrite it. But before we go further into the practical, into the what our listeners can do and take today to start, improving their thoughts, improving their feelings, improving their actions, talk about, Alan, what was your upbringing like? What was the good, bad, and the ugly between your birth and today that made you the man you are? Like, what made this so important in your life?
Well, I grew up in New York City in Manhattan, and
So super
it
low
was,
energy, very slow pace of life, right?
yeah, it was like the only dirt road in New York. Yeah,
For those around the world, I'm being sarcastic. So
yeah.
go ahead and talk to us about your upbringing, Alan.
But right now, I do live at the end of a dirt road, so I've gone to that extreme finally. Um,
Nice.
so I grew up in New York City, and people always say to me, "What was that like?" And I go, "Well, compared to what? I don't have anything to compare it to. That's all I knew." One thing about people in New York, I find, and especially going away from New York, or people being surprised that I grew up in New York, is New York City is people think it's the center of the universe, which it is a kind of center for some cultural things. It's not the only one for art, for other things, but it's something that there's a sense of self-importance there that I think it's a little bit misplaced. So I grew up there, and I then decided to become an actor, and I went to the College at Purchase, which is an acting conservatory, and that's something that it was actually my acting teacher there that led me to, I'd hurt my back doing sit-ups the wrong way. And then I got better, and I hurt it again when I was wallpapering his bathroom. I was an actor, that's how I made a living. And he said, go see this man who does the Feldenkrais method. And I went, what? I mean, that's nonsense. I didn't want to do that. And it sounded like some new agey trippy thing that didn't make any sense. But after that, I went to a chiropractor, and he actually made me worse. So I thought I'd try this Feldenkrais practitioner. And I went to him, and he was barely touching me. It was kind of like a joke. It was expensive, and I thought, what a waste of time and money. And I stood up at the end, and I had no pain. And I was really puzzled. And I said, what did you do? It just didn't feel like much. And he went, you did it. And I said, no, really, what did you do? He said, really, I was helping your body doing what it's doing. And I thought, oh, it's a secret. And then 3 days later, I was driving on a road in New York called the FDR Drive, which is like a pinball machine for cars. And I noticed I wasn't getting angry. But what happened to me? All I could relate it to was this Feldenkrais session. And I went back to him. I didn't have any pain anymore. But after the third time, I thought, I want to learn this because I bet I could do this part-time and pursue acting. And to learn the Feldenkrais method, it's 4 years long. And I was fortunate to get into the last training that Dr. Feldenkrais was teaching. And when I graduated a year and a half later, I had a waiting list. Thought, well, this is pretty secure. I really liked it, found it interesting, still find it interesting. I still do it. And in the Feldenkrais method, there's two modalities. There's a hands-on technique called functional integration, and then there's a class technique called awareness through movement. And in that, I guide people through very slow, gentle movements that affect changes in breathing, posture, reduction or elimination of pain, changes in self-image. And it's more about the quality of how we move. And over time, I started in playing with this idea. I was actually creating a workshop on self-image. And I started to think our self-image was a reflection of how much we like ourselves or how much we don't like ourselves. And after a few years of that, I started to think this is my job to help people like themselves. Now, as I was starting to describe in awareness through movement, the quality of movement is probably one of the most significant aspects of what we're doing. And then I started posing the question to people, are you moving in a way that you like the way it feels? And I was surprised to find out how many people were. So it's a really important question. And you know, if I can even take a leap, because people say then, well, do I have to take these classes to learn to like myself? Well, no, I think it's one avenue, and it was the avenue I began on. But if you think about it, throughout your day, how much do you move in a way that you like the way it feels? Or where are you even allowed to feel pleasure in movement? And even if you add up all the things that you can think of where you're allowed to feel pleasure in movement, you'll be lucky to get 4 or 5 hours a day. That'd be generous. So that means you've got 19, 20 hours a day, aside from sleep. There's still a number of hours that we're not really valuing ourselves and seeing, can we, by moving in a way that we like the way it feels, kind of enter into the back door of who we are and see over time that we find, you know, something shifted and I think I like myself. And you can see that's another example where it's not dependent on something outside of us to do. It's something we control completely within ourselves. And so that's some of the history and where I am today, and still going strong. So
When you went to this place, I guess you were expecting like a chiropractor type experience, but what actually happened and, how did it make you better?
Okay, so in a Feldenkrais session like that, someone is lying down fully clothed on a low table, and you're being moved around very gently. I think a way of describing it that might make more sense is that when I'm moving someone like that, I'm looking and exploring the initiation of the movement. So let's say you have an arm that you hurt playing baseball or tennis or something, and it's all sore, and you have a diagnosis for it, even of some kind. But the question that's important to me is, how come some days it hurts and some days it doesn't hurt? That's true for most people. So it means the days that it doesn't hurt, you're doing something differently. So when I put someone, let's say, lying on their side and I start to move their shoulder forward and back, I'm listening very discreetly for any change in quality. And it usually happens pretty fast, that it gets a little slower, thicker, even stops. And that's an indication of the muscular habit and how movement is connected through the person. So from there, what I'm looking at, can that connection from the shoulder through to the arm happen further through the torso, all the way down to the pelvis where the larger muscles reside? And if that connection happens, then there's less stress and strain when someone is moving their shoulder, moving their arm. And the result of that is that they can do things that they couldn't do before. They can do things without pain. And more importantly, that they have the means themselves to generate that. So they're not dependent on coming back to me again and again to say, oh, I did it again, help me. When I can help someone, look, for example, if I ask someone where the arm begins and ends, the typical answer, and it's correct, is from the fingers to the shoulder, right? That's the self-image that we carry within all of us. If you learn skeletal anatomy, you learn that the arm begins at the sternoclavicular joint and includes the collarbone and the shoulder blade. And I used to joke that when I learned that, that was a change in my self-image. Not because I felt it, but because now I was an expert. And if someone talked about their arm, I'd go, oh, well, your arm actually begins here, blah, 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 blah. But then if you look at a child, because if we look at things from a biological point of view, we get a much more accurate sense of what might be true for most people, not dependent on a culture or an activity or anything like that. If you look at a child reaching for something, they don't reach from their shoulder with the arm, and they don't reach from their clavicle and shoulder blade. When a child reaches for something, it's their pelvis moving their arm through space. So that means the connection of moving further through ourselves is one of the most fundamental things that we begin with, and unfortunately we inhibit it. So what that man did with me was simply that. He got movement to connect further through me, and that's what I do with people too. So if I work with someone who's had a stroke, or a kid with cerebral palsy, or someone with back, neck, knee pain, or a professional athlete or dancer, actor, musician, it's the same idea, that movement can transmit more effectively through one's skeleton. And when that happens, the results are quite dramatic.
So now we're talking about the physiological,
Yeah,
working through and healing that way. But then the inside, the joy, the peace, the happiness, the self-image, the
right.
mental shift, how does
Yeah.
that play into what you're doing?
Well, that's a good question, because then we have to examine, what do we mean by self-image? And there's so many things like self-image. First of all, self-image is an explanatory principle. What does that mean? That means it explains a phenomena, but it's not something you can hold in your hands. Where's your self-image? It's the result of our lives in many ways, and what we do, what we think, we feel, but it's not a tangible thing. But we can examine self-image from the point of view, what's it made up of? And Dr. Feldenkrais had a really interesting way of looking at self-image, that it was comprised of our thinking, our feeling in an emotional sense, our sensing, in terms of how we process and take in information, and our movement, our actions in life. And a change in any of these aspects of the self is the potential to change the other aspects. So if I change how I think, it can change how I feel. If I change how I move, it can change how I think. And Feldenkrais chose movement as the doorway in because it's the most immediate, the most concrete, and it's felt at that moment. So if you move differently, you can feel it. So, sometimes I'll work with someone at the end of a session, they sit up and they're sitting much more erect and supported and feel more stable and more mobile. But sometimes they say, I can't sit like this. And I go, why? So, because it feels arrogant. Because they're used to being kind of rounded over and hunched a little bit. And to sit in this other way is too big a change for them. I said, well, let's go slowly. We don't have to change all of this at once. So changes like this take time. But as I told you in the beginning, when after the first session I had, when I was driving my car a few days later, and I wasn't getting angry. So it had a direct impact on my emotional life. I couldn't understand it at that point, but it was something that's always stayed with me, and I see it develop in other people as well. So self-image for me is probably one of the key things I'm interested in. And because the whole idea of liking ourselves, that's a factor of self-image. Without that, we can accomplish things, we can be good at things, but at the point, if we lost all those things, who are we, right? And if who I end up being is someone who can still, if I lost my job, if I lost my home, if I lost my relationships, can I still be satisfied with myself as who I am? And along with that, of the actions that I do in my life, if I can end up with just the ability to be kind to others and to myself, I can't think of anything better.
Yeah. Now, for yourself, do you have like a storefront brick and mortar practice? Do you just have people come to you? Do you do seminars? How do you work? And then how do people maybe get like, say they can't, you're in one state, they're in a different country. Are there people all over the country they can connect with and over the world? How does the network of your practitioner work?
Yeah. So I have a private practice in my home where I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Most of my time I spend training people to become Feldenkrais practitioners. So right now I have a program in Santa Fe. Right now I'm talking to you from Belgium, where I have a program in Brussels. Then I have one in France I'm going to next, starting one in Taiwan. And they all meet for about 2 months a year in different schedules for 4 years. And there are practitioners throughout the United States, I think at least 35 different countries have Feldenkrais guilds, so there's enough people there to have practitioners there as well. So there's plenty, and they can always just Google Feldenkrais in the countries they're in, and they'll find plenty of information about it. So it's easily accessible.
No, are there online programs like for me? I've had a problem with the middle of my back. It's so annoying. It drives me nuts, right? Is this something I could do from home? Is it like an online course or is it something like a
Well,
self-help?
the course itself, because so much of it is hands-on, there's more online than there used to be since COVID, right? So COVID put us all in the position where we had to adapt. And I had one program that had 1 month left to graduate, and I got permission to graduate them online, and I had 5 cameras and a switching box and people who could be around and stuff. And quite honestly, I felt for the hands-on work, I was giving them about 50% of what I should have been giving them, because I couldn't go around in any way and clarify anything or help show them something a little bit differently. But the classwork, the awareness through movement, that's available a lot online. And I'm actually going, after France, I'm going to Switzerland where I record a new workshop each year. And that's something on my website, I've got, I think, 21 or 22 workshops, 2-day workshops that people could do at home. Right. And again, that's really effective for what you're talking about, for what your need is. And at the same time, some people need more private work. So when I work privately with someone, it's
Mm.
I'm actually feeling how they're moving to reveal their blind spots to them so that they can act or move, feel in a different way. Okay. But often, many people I work with privately, I say, okay, now do these lessons at home and see if you can figure it out yourself so you can maintain it yourself. So there's a great broad range of how it's available to people.
So
Sure,
for our listeners, is there a, hey, try this before you reach out to me, before you take a course, A,
yeah,
B, C, one, two, three. Here's something you can try from home to see how things work.
sure. On my website, there are free resources where you can download lessons and do things and figure it out for yourself. And I mean, even if you buy a workshop, it's not that expensive, you know. And then you've got like 7 or 8 lessons that you can do on your own over time to see how you benefit.
Nice.
And
And what is your website? We'll put links in the
well,
show notes, but
that
what's the best
website
way?
that website is www.uncommonsensing.com. And that's for my Feldenkrais practice. I have other websites for training programs, blah, 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 but it's all accessible through there. And then there's also the website for my book, which is available there too. And that's practicing-kindness.com. And that's another avenue to explore oneself, to like yourself more and better the world a little bit too.
And so how did you come up with your practicing, your traveling, your teaching, and then all of a sudden you decide to write this book? What was the need or the catalyst in the book?
So I was, like I said, I was very fortunate. When I started my private practice, within a year and a half, I had a wait list. So I was seeing like 35 people a week and I had 80 people in classes, and it just took off. And then after about 3 or 4 years, I became an assistant trainer to participate in Feldenkrais training programs, and then a trainer in 1994, and I've been doing that ever since then. And the the catalyst for developing the book was, like I said, this whole idea of helping people like themselves more. But there was another catalyst too, and that was more personal, and it was with my father. And my dad was a really nice guy. We were never very close, you know. And later on, towards the end of his life, he ran out of money, and my brother and I, fortunately, were able to help him out and support him. And then he developed dementia. And he was living in Florida at the time, on the East Coast there. And my stepmother, I was there, and I said, can't take care of him anymore. We put him in a home. It was a pretty nice place. And that was, I guess, in May. And then I realized that she's going to New York for the summer to visit her family and grandkids. My dad's going to be all alone. Everyone's gone, that part of Florida. They all leave for the hot summer. And I thought, huh, I'm going to start calling him every day. And I was, like I said, I was never close to him. And he knew who I was, fortunately, all the time. And we probably talked for 5 minutes. And to me, that was like the biggest learning about an act of kindness that I'd ever experienced before, because I did that for 3 years. And there were so many times that I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And he was in Florida. I was living in California at the time, and time differences worked out well. And, it's like, if you think about it, something practical. Can you give your attention to someone for 5 minutes a day? Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when I was writing the book on kindness, I actually thought, okay, I'm going to do this with my dog. I'm just going to be with him for 5 minutes. It rarely was 5 minutes. I'd be petting him and all this. Oh, I got to check my email, just this. And I'd jump up. And of course, he just followed me around. He was happy for whatever he got. He didn't have a clock, you know. But I was shocked at how hard it actually is to do that. And when we participate in something like that, when we practice something like that, that's one of the chances to grow ourselves that we don't expect, because it's not always easy. And we have to differentiate our feelings from our actions. That means that I don't feel like doing it, but I'm going to do it. And I'm not talking about the Nike ad of just do it, where it's extreme and where people can even hurt themselves, but that I can act in another way than how I'm feeling. And it becomes a choice. And over time, that choice becomes something that's actually pleasurable, right? And that's true for anyone who goes running every day or meditates every day. That how do we create the circumstances where we can continue doing this and feel good about it as well? So that's pretty much why I'm here. It's my mission, you know.
Well, that's good. And then you're traveling the world fulfilling
Yeah.
that mission.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, Alan, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? You got a busy schedule, you're traveling the globe. What's the best way to connect?
I think on my Uncommon Sensing website was my email and contact information. And but you just Google my name and you'll find there's plenty of places to reach me there. And just anyone who's listening should know that if I don't respond to you within 3 days, I didn't get it. So I'm really fast with email. And of course, I do my best to answer people's questions. Sometimes people's questions are outside of a realistic answer that I can give them without seeing them or knowing them personally, but I can almost always refer them to someone, right? And I'm always interested in the experiences that people had, whether it's from doing one of my workshops online or reading my book or anything like that. Because to me, that's where I can learn a lot too, to help make things clearer for people and make these ideas accessible to them in a realistic way.
Awesome. Well, Alan, it's been a pleasure getting to know you today. I have a bunch more questions, but before I ask anything else, is there anything between your birth and today that we didn't cover that's significant and you want to share with our audience?
Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned that I went to this acting conservatory, and I actually auditioned 3 years in a row before I got into that school. And my best friend got into the school the first time. After the third audition, called me up and he said, "Well, the first 10 letters just went out and your name wasn't." And I was, "Oh, what a bummer." And the next day I got a letter of acceptance. And I was kind of like, "Whoa." I called him up. I said, "Ricky, I got in. You're wrong." I said, "I hope it wasn't a mistake." And that kind of, I carried that with me for a few years, always wondering about that. And it was that acting teacher who introduced me to the Feldenkrais method. And many years later, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years later, my acting teacher, he had turned 70 and was having all these health issues and he was thinking about death and mortality. And he said, "I have something to share with you. And I hope you'll take it as a gift." After that, I took a step back, like, what's coming next? And he said, "You know that letter that went out?" I said, "What letter?" He said, "The one that accepted you to purchase." I said, "Yeah." He said, "It was a mistake." I said, "What?" He said, "No one knows how you got that letter. It was signed by the dean." He said, "And it wasn't a mistake. You belong there, right?" But then I thought back and I thought, well, that's the acting teacher that got me into Feldenkrais, that led me to liking ourselves, that led me to kindness. And I thought, my whole life is based on a mistake. And it was like finding out I was adopted or something. It took me a year to even talk about it. And I think it's important to realize that all of our histories, regardless of whether they were accurate or mistakes or not, that where we are today, just listening to this today, is the chance for you to better yourself, for you to like yourself more, to create a better world around yourself. So that's kind of hidden story I don't talk about.
Well, thank you for sharing with that with us. And I mean, there are no coincidences, there are no accidents. I mean, that happened for a distinct reason. God had it in your life, but you didn't realize it for years later. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, we'll put the link in the show notes to your websites. And then hopefully you have a great trip and teaching circuit and we can stay in touch. And I just keep thinking, like, if someone is like, okay, well, I kind of want to try this. You said go to your website, there's programs, but is it something where if they're feeling dysfunction within their own body, can they try? And I'm still a little unclear there. Like, could I find a way to like move and change my body mechanics from home
Yeah,
online where
yeah,
I actually have relief in my back?
definitely, definitely. That's what the movement lessons are about. And in the same way, like the book on kindness is practical things to do, everyday things you can do. So if it wasn't that, why talk about it? Then someone just feels frustrated, like, well, that sounds great, but I don't have access to it. So all of these things are accessible.
Good, good. Well, it's been a pleasure to meet you today, Alan. You're a remarkable man. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming on our podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Yes. And ladies and gentlemen, like our slogan says, don't just listen to great content from Alan. Do it. Repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world, but more importantly, in eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. This is our good friend, Alan Questel, and we hope to see you at the top soon. If you have any questions between now and then, reach out to Alan or myself. We love you. We only want to see you thrive, but more than we could ever love you, God loves you. So go to him. Let us know if we can help in the flesh, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.